Yeah, let's get serious here. We were talking about this last time. A well-adjusted police officer should be able to carry out the stressful duties of the job without becoming seriously and continuously affected by the stress. And this is true in anything that you do. If you're trying to help people, stress and burnout is very important. And it's one of the things that you need to think about. What kind of a personality, and the other thing you need to think about is what kind of a personality do these people need? You guys have communicated with me, not specifically the people in this class, but people have communicated with me, and there are select police officers on the reservation who, when they are out and patrolling, everybody stays in because there's something going on with these guys. They want to arrest people. They want to stop everybody. They're very strict. And eventually, of course, the stress is going to get to those select individuals, and they're not going to do it anymore. You need to be thick-skinned because there are some relatively negative names that they refer to police officers. And police officers can become defensive. I mean, if you call them, during the hippie era, they referred to them as pigs. I don't know why, it never made any sense to me. But of course there were people that referred to them as pigs. I'm sure that there are some really nasty names that they refer to policemen by in this modern era. Yet they must be sensitive to the needs of others, of course, and this is the hard part. They've got to be thick-skinned, yet they have to be responsive to people when they really need them. So you come across one individual and this person is giving you a hard time and they're being very defensive, they're being very rebellious, and it makes you really upset. And then the next person that comes along is somebody that you need to help, somebody that you really need to react to. But you just dealt with the biggest jackass the world has ever created, and now you have to be nice to the next person that comes along. And you're not really feeling like helping anyone, but the reality is that's your job. They must be aware of the dangers of their job. Did I tell you the story of my cousin? In Indianapolis. He was a police officer in Indianapolis. Domestic disturbance call. He called for backup. He heard the woman screaming inside. They had been told that the person was armed. But when he heard her scream, of course, he reacted by telling them that he was going in. The backup was a couple minutes away. He went into the apartment, and she was standing in front of him. When he pushed the door open, she was standing in front of him. You could see that she was still alive. She was okay, but she was still screaming. He came in to help her, and the guy was behind the door with a shotgun, shot him in the chest and killed him. And of course they arrested the guy. My cousin's dead. Nothing happened to the lady. So what was the domestic disturbance? It was a physical abuse. He was abusing her. And of course, when he heard the police sirens, he armed himself. She screamed because she saw him with a shotgun, and that's why she screamed. My cousin reacted by trying to help her. Domestic disturbance call, and now he's dead. That was 3 years ago in Indianapolis. His name was Rod Bradway, so you can look up Rod if you want. Interesting guy, kind of a big guy. I know, he doesn't take after me. He was my third cousin on my dad's side, of course. Anyway, so there are dangers, and the most dangerous thing tends to be the time when you don't think it's the most dangerous. Domestic disturbance. These two people are fighting with each other. So why in the world is it dangerous for the policeman? Well, it is, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Police officers' major duty is service to others. Arresting only takes up about 10% of their time. The rest of the time, they're dealing with things. They're trying to maintain order. They're trying to help people. So they're almost like social workers. In essence, they are. But they're social workers who have a pistol on their head and have a taser someplace probably, and they need to be part of the community. And this is hard. This is really hard. An officer needs to have a genuine interest in people and compassion for these select individuals. Is a good policeman the mean guy, or is a good policeman the nice guy? Well, the reality is, sometimes you gotta be mean and sometimes you gotta be nice. I know, that's the hard part. Could I be a police officer? Probably not. I'm too easygoing, I'm too nice a guy, yeah. Should I give you time constraints for all this stuff that you need to turn in? My God, you guys are all behind. What the hell's wrong with you? I want them in today. Okay, there we go. I'm just practicing.
Don't practice, that means you're going to do it.
My golly. And as I said in the last class, I have students that don't like me because I don't set parameters. You guys need structure in your lives. Really? Tough shit. It ain't gonna happen here. I'll let Sarah be mean to you. If you want to take a class from a tough person, take one from Christine. If you're 5 seconds late, she's gonna dock you. Or take a class from OJ if you need organization by $1. If you take my class, forget about it. Could I be a policeman? No, I'd let everybody go. I'd never arrest
You
anybody.
should be a policeman.
I'm sorry, are those handcuffs too tight? I was stationed in Germany, and I was at the Bahnhof one night. I'd just taken my car up to Bremerhaven to ship back to the States. I'd just driven it up there, and I got on the train, and I got stuck in a train station in Hamburg. Yeah, in Hamburg, not in Hamburg. I was in Hamburg, not in Hamburg. I'm sorry, I was in Hamburg. Huge train station. And the place was just packed with people. And so I'm sitting there, and I've got like 3 hours before the train. I'm trying to go to sleep, and this drunk comes up, and the reason I knew he was drunk was because he took his whiskey bottle, which was half full, and he threw it up in the air, and it came down, and it exploded all over the sidewalk. Okay, so I got splashed with glass, I got splashed with whiskey. It was whiskey, it wasn't Jägermeister or anything. Anyway, so he does that, and he's just kind of screaming around, and he goes into the cafeteria, and he starts yelling at the people behind the counter. All of a sudden, the police come in, Polizei, German Polizei. And of course, they've got these big smiles on their faces, and they go in, there's 2 of them, and they go in, and of course, they're Germans, so they're big as trucks. They look like the Rock. 2 rocks go into Polizei, go in to arrest this guy. So they go in, and he starts screaming, and all of a sudden, he stops. He just stops screaming. So then he started whining. You know, I don't know if you've ever been around, well, you have never been around Germans. Germans, they sound like little girls when they're upset. If they get hurt, they start crying like little girls. That's funny. And he started whining, and then he started crying. So then they came out with him, and what they did, they had put handcuffs on him, so his hands were together like this. I can't do that behind my back because I got a bad shoulder. But so his hands are like this behind him. And one of them has his baton, and he's holding him up like that. They're pulling his, I don't know how in the world they kept from yanking both of his shoulders out of the socket. But I mean, that's what they were doing. That's how they were controlling this guy. Had the biggest smiles on their face you ever saw. Like it was a joke, right? German Polizei. I know. In the United States, we carry Glocks. We carry 9mm pistols. They carry 9mm pistols too, but they're tiny little things. They're about the size of your hand. So their pistols are on their hips. And it looks like a 22 or something. Or a cat pistol or something. It's a tiny little gun. But as you can see, Americans, of course, we carry the biggest guns we can find because we want people to know that we're armed and dangerous. They really are armed and dangerous over in Germany. They will knock your teeth out. If you even say anything to them, they'll knock your teeth out. Funny, funny people. You're not all laughing. Okay, you need to treat people as people. There you go, not as creatures or animals or whatever. All right. Although a degree of caution and suspiciousness may be desirable for the job, the police officer should be free of impulsive, overly aggressive reactions and other responses in which emotions overcome the discipline imposed by the training. Okay. Does that make sense? You can't react emotionally to anything. And of course, if you've ever watched actually how policemen interact with clients, or not with clients, with people on the street, they try to maintain the timbre of their voices. They don't yell at people unless they need somebody to stop. They will yell at them, of course. But usually they speak in a very gentle tone in order to try to bring these people down from their emotional highs. Of course, the biggest problem is, what if this individual is on drugs? Like PCP, if they're on PCP, all bets are off. You never know what's going to happen next. But even if they're on heroin, well, not on heroin, but if they're smoking pot, or if they're on crystal meth, or something like that, then the individual is going to react in a really emotional way. And of course, the policemen never know this when they start talking to somebody. Is this person drunk? Alcohol. Does alcohol make you aggressive, or does it make you sleepy, or does it make you laugh, find everything funny? What does alcohol do to you?
I think it depends.
It does, doesn't it? Some people, it makes them act one way. Some people can be drunk and they're really happy, and then the next thing you know, they're trying to beat somebody to death. Have you ever seen that in a drunk person? So we never know how they're going to react, do we? No, we don't. Even if they're reacting one way right now, if you try to control them, then they may act aggressively. So you just never know. So you have to try to keep them calm.
I once had a friend who went enraged. She threw out my cousin's sister's clothing. She threw out a computer monitor. Really don't know.
Chocolate.
Why would they do that? I'm not going to mention your name.
Those were not even her stuff. I mean, she grabbed my cousin's sister's husband's clothes, and she started just ripping it with a
I
knife.
hate it when they tear your clothes off.
Oh, man.
Now, this is kind of a sad picture. I apologize for the picture. Yeah, okay. What has happened here, this is a service dog, and the dog is, the dog started having seizures, can't walk, so they decided they had to put the dog down.
Did that really happen?
Yeah, it's a real picture. It happened in Connecticut. The dog had 13 years of service, and of course everybody became extremely emotional because it's a dog. If it had been a guy, they wouldn't have been nearly as emotional. But because it was a dog, and of course dogs are men's best friend, or people's best friends, I guess. Anyway, they all lined up and saluted him as they were taking him to the car to be euthanized. And he's a German Shepherd, so they only lived to be about 15. This guy had 13 years of service. He was a drug dog, and he had saved a lot of people's lives. You know how dogs are. They save people's lives. So it's kind of an emotional thing. Oh, wait a minute, I didn't read what's going on. Officers should be committed to their jobs and not be inclined toward frequent lateness or absenteeism, or have personal problems that interfere with this commitment. When I was living in Oklahoma, the state police in Oklahoma were having a problem with their pay. And so they went to work every day like they were supposed to. They stopped people who were speeding like they were supposed to, but they didn't issue any tickets, which was good for me because I got stopped about 5 times. But they didn't issue me a ticket. They issued me a warning. Every time they issued me a warning, which was kind of nice.
5 warnings?
Yeah, 5 warnings, exactly. However, I got stopped, the second time I got stopped, the policeman, I have no idea why, but for some reason he thought that I was dangerous. So he stopped me, and of course I'm going, oh yeah, I'm speeding. I was going to work, actually. I was going to teach. I was teaching a class at Tinker Air Force Base. And he stopped me on the freeway going into Tinker. And he stopped me, and all of a sudden, he put his gun on his head, and he points at me, and he said, he's looking at me through the rear view mirror, and he says, "Don't get out of the car and keep your hands on the steering wheel." He's got his hand on his gun, and he's down like this, and he's pointing at me. You know, that means, I knew what that meant. Don't do anything. So I did. I put both my hands on the steering wheel, and he came up to the car, you know, like just, there's only one cop in his vehicle, so he's coming up to my driver's side with his gun on, with his hand on his gun, and he's looking at me like I'm about to attack him or something. Little bitty me in a little bitty car.
Would you have?
I didn't want to get shot. I'm stupid, but I'm not that stupid. Anyway, here's a close-up of the man saluting. This is the sergeant, of course, that's in charge of the whole group. And there's his taser. He's got his taser over here. His gun's on the other side. Police officers should be team players, able to function effectively within a chain of command. And of course, that's one of the reasons why I have this picture here. This includes the ability to give orders to supervisees and accept orders from superior officers. Of course, it's like being in the military. And in a way, it's like being in the military. And a lot of police officers are military. Now, the problem with that is PTSD. If they're suffering PTSD from their military service, then possibly select things will happen to them while they are policemen, and they will react as if they were in the military rather than as a policeman. In the military, you shoot first and don't ask questions ever. But as a policeman, of course, you can't do that. You can't draw down on somebody and shoot them just for no reason whatsoever. Police officers should be able to examine a crime scene and develop hypotheses about what happened and what characteristics might be present in the lawbreaker, and this is known as deductive analysis. They need to deduce what happened, so they're always creating stories. So in essence, all police officers should be the smartest people in the community because they have to solve all these crimes. What if they aren't the smartest people in the community? They still have to solve all these crimes. So what's the probability they will solve crimes correctly? If they're not smart. They can't figure things out. They don't have the ability to deduce what has happened. If they can't create hypotheses, what happens next? I don't know what happens next. I guess bad things happen next. We don't solve any crimes. I haven't heard what's going on with, I keep asking about the child that was killed in Ganado. Do we still don't have a clue? And that's the FBI. This is Al Seidman. He was chief of police in New York City. Once upon a time, he was asked to consult on a case in a rural town in Connecticut. They had a body. They had a skeleton of a man. And they couldn't identify it. They had no idea what happened. They didn't know if it was a murder. They had no clue. And so they called Seidman in, and he told them, this is before he actually got there. He said, look at his teeth. What's going on with his teeth? You can usually identify people by their teeth. But as it turned out, he didn't have any dental work. The skeleton hadn't had any dental work. So there's two possibilities, right? If they haven't had any dental work, either he's not a wealthy person and he has no union insurance, or he worked at a low-paying, non-unionized job, making enough money to stay off of Medicaid. If he had Medicaid, then we would know what his teeth looked like. If he had Medicaid, he would have had dental work done. But he didn't have any dental work done. So evidently, he was in a non-unionized shop. What's the other possibility? Either he was in a non-unionized shop,
Or he didn't take care of his teeth.
I'm sorry?
He didn't take care of his teeth.
Evidently his teeth were good enough that Anyway, his teeth are in pretty good shape. We can say that. If he'd been wealthy, of course, he would have gone to the dentist. If he'd been in a union shop, he would have gone to the dentist. If he'd been on Medicare, he would have gone to the dentist. But there's two people that don't go to the dentist. One is if he worked in a job that was non-unionized, didn't have any dental care with his job, but he made enough money to stay off of Medicaid. That's one possibility, but there's another possibility. It's not like there's only one option here. So we know he wasn't unionized. We know he wasn't wealthy. We know he wasn't on Medicaid. He wasn't so poor that he was on Medicaid. What's the other possibility?
He was an alien.
I'm sorry? You're really close to being right, I think.
False
Yeah.
teeth?
I'm sorry?
False teeth?
No.
No.
Which one? Yeah,
He's
teeth.
He
He's
was
a
a
skeleton.
foreigner? He's not
I'm sorry?
foreign, yeah. He was a foreigner?
Kind of. He could have been a transient. He could have been somebody from someplace else. So even though he died in Connecticut, maybe he's from Texas. Maybe he's from someplace else. So either he made enough money that he stayed off of Medicaid, but he was non-unionized, he wasn't wealthy, or he was somebody from someplace else. And they have no clue what's going on as far as that someplace else goes. Nobody filed a missing persons report. That's really important because if nobody filed a missing persons report, it means nobody cared about him. So he wasn't being missed by anybody. Therefore, he probably wasn't married. He's probably single. He's probably living in one of those places where you get a room for a week and nobody cared. The clerk certainly wouldn't have cared. If he had a job that was a continuous job, somebody would have noticed, but nobody noticed. Okay. So they figured that he was single and he was living in a flop house. A flop house is a place that you rent by the hour or by the day or whatever. And of course, everybody pays taxes. So, and what they figured that they would do, if he was working, if he was this guy, if he was working a non-unionized job, he was being paid enough to stay off Medicaid, he had to pay taxes. So what they were going to do, they were going to look at the people who had stopped paying withholding tax about the time this guy died and see if they could identify him from that. And of course, at the end of the year, he wouldn't file his taxes. So they would know about all the local taxes. You know, you have to file federal taxes, you have to file state taxes, you have to file local taxes depending on where you are. And that's the way they do it in Connecticut. Or he could have been somebody from someplace else. Seidman, this is in a book called Chief. Seidman wouldn't have included this unless he was right. And of course he was right, and they did figure out who he was by looking at these three pieces of information. But there's always a possibility that they wouldn't have found who he was. But they did. I mean, if he'd been from Texas or Tennessee or someplace, they would never have discovered who he is. Lots of missing persons out there, a lot of dead bodies that we discover that we can't identify. It's just the way it works. Somebody's traveling across country, and they have a heart attack in sailing, so now we've got this dead person with no identification. How in the world do we ever identify them? If they're from, Maine or something. Now you put out a bolo on this individual and see if you can identify them. So what kind of people do we need as police officers? Psychologists evaluate police candidates. When they do that, they rely on personal interviews. They rely on observations of the candidates in situations that reflect real-world police work, and they look at psychological tests. That's what psychologists do. So what is the perfect person to be a police officer? What kind of a person do you want as a police officer? What kind of attributes do you want them to have? They have to be tall. What else?
Serious?
Serious?
Yeah.
Not like me. I'm not serious. Okay.
Mentally,
Serious and tall.
mentally stable?
Mentally stable, I like that. I really like that a lot. Mentally stable. So we need a mentally stable, tall, I forgot what the other one was. Serious.
Liberal.
Serious. No sense of humor. Policemen should never have a sense of humor. What else? What else do we want our policemen to be?
Maybe be able to work with others.
They need to be able to work with others. Good point. That's an excellent.
Workaholic?
A workaholic?
Dedication.
You know, I'm thinking no, because I'm thinking that these people need to decompress. Otherwise, they're going to burn out.
Modest, or what do you call it, honest? Because-
Honest? Okay. They need to have integrity. They need to be honest. I like that. Anything else? Logical? Michelle, did you say something? Moral? I like that too. Yeah, let's make them moral. Good idea.
Thick skin, you put on.
Thick skin, they need to be thick-skinned. Thin skin, they're gonna blow up at some point and shoot somebody or beat them up or something. Get upset. Of course, when we see this on television, we go, good, that guy deserved it. You know, that's what we say. Interviews are widely used despite evidence that interviews are subject to distortion, low reliability, and questionable validity. Some people that interview, they don't like anybody, and so they reject everybody. And this is a problem. Then there are other people. If I interview somebody, I like everybody. I rationalize, if they have a problem, I rationalize the problem. I'm a terrible interviewer. But some people, they don't like anybody. So they reject everybody, and I would accept everybody. So I would not be any better than somebody that rejects everybody. So there is a problem with the person that's doing the interviewing. We won't go into that. Reliability does seem to be increased by the use of structured interviews, those in which the wording, order, and content of the interview are standardized. And that's the way we interview here. When we're interviewing for a new position, what we do is, it's all standardized. We always say the same thing. We always ask the same questions. And of course, if I'm one of the interviewers, if I'm an interviewer, I like everybody. I try to see only positive things because that's part of my personality, is accepting only positive things.
Is it okay, like, say, the community has a new position opening, you know, and this is a community here, and they got a board panel together and they interviewed, and they chose a certain person. Is it okay for the community and everybody to have a meeting with the interviewers and ask them, well, why did you choose this person? And, you know, like, how come you didn't choose the other person? Is it morally right, or?
No. The more people you have making a decision, the more likely you're not going to make a decision. That's one of the reasons why, if we look at that panel right here, there's 3 people doing the interview. 3 is about the perfect number. Anything over 5 and you've got, you'll never make a decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why committees need to be about 3 people. I got one over here. Or you can sit beside Brian if you want. You don't have to. I wouldn't, but.
Yes, you do, Bruce.
Yeah, I would, yeah. I'd sit beside you all day long. I made fun of you the whole time, probably. Okay, so we need structured interviews, and the reason we need structured interviews is because we need to ask the same questions. We need to be looking for the same answers from all of the candidates so that we can make a lucid decision. 3 people is good, 5 people is pushing it. Anything over 5 is way too many. That's one of the reasons why, no, we don't want the community coming in and second guessing everything that we do. Because there will be, some people in the community will be negative, some people in the community will be hyper positive, and we won't get any decisions made. Situational tests, for example, foot patrol observation tests, use tasks similar to those done by the officers on the job. And this is a good way to do it. Unfortunately, it's expensive and it takes too much time. So we can't do this. This is one of the best ways to judge whether they will be good at their job or not. But unfortunately, it takes too much time and it's too expensive. These tests are currently out of favor, of course, in part because they are time-consuming and expensive. Current situational aspects of screening are more focused, involving tasks such as report writing. How exciting is that? So we're going to hire a new policeman by how well he writes. Whether he writes it grammatically sensitive or not. What a great idea. Many standardized psychological tests have good reliability. Two types of tests are included in most selection batteries. Tests of cognitive or intellectual ability and tests of personality traits, integrity, or emotional stability. Emotional stability is extremely important. We want this person not to go off and start pumping away at the other officers in the room. We want them not to do that. We need them to have integrity because we certainly don't want them to take bribes. There's a lot of money out there, and if they look the other way, we were talking about the $3 million last time. $3 million worth of street drugs. Give me $500,000 and I'm good to go. I won't remember that you are the ones pushing the drugs. And personality traits, of course. They need to have the right personality to be a good police officer. Intelligence scores tend to correlate fairly strongly with the performance of police recruits in their training programs, but are weakly related to police performance in the field. The smarter they are, the sooner they're going to become frustrated with their job. Most of their job doesn't have anything to do with crime. Most of their job has to do with helping people. How much intelligence do you need for that? How frustrated are you going to get? Has anybody ever worked in a factory where you did the same thing over and over and over and over and over again? Am I the only one? It's frustrating. It's boring. It really is. You've got to create some kind of a game in your head so that, you've got to do this for 8 hours. I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again. Muscle memory. And if you're not careful, then you will start thinking of something else. And if you start thinking of something else, all of a sudden you're going to put the part in incorrectly, and the stamp that comes down is going to take off your little finger. Whoops, this isn't good. So you need to concentrate on what you're doing, but you need to not be frustrated. And you do this for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. How boring and horrible is that? And that's one of the problems with being a police officer. It's kind of the same thing over and over and over and over again. The Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, this is a 2008 revision, is the test of personality most often used in police screening. MMPI will give you a schizophrenia score, it'll give you a sexual orientation score, it'll give you a hypochondria score. It gives you, there's 11 different categories, and they all have to do with different types of personalities. So you will get a score for everybody. When I took the MMPI, my schizophrenia score was relatively low. I can tell you that. Okay, so I'm not schizophrenic, and of course I'm not a hypochondriac either, so I got fairly low score as far as that was concerned. How about depression? No, my depression score was pretty low as well, and so was my anxiety score. And my sexual orientation was normal, so not sure what that means. I have a normal sexual orientation. I don't know what that means. I know what it used to mean, but I'm not sure in today's society what it means. Only one personality test developed specifically to identify psychologically unsuitable law enforcement candidates is the INWALD personality inventory. And this is specifically for policemen. And it's also for firemen. It can predict poor job performance better than traditional tests of personality and psychopathology such as the MMPI and its revisions. And one reason is because it is looking for specific things. The MMPI is fairly general, so it gives you a general score. And that's maybe one of the reasons why I scored in the middle on almost everything. Because it's not looking for something specific. If you're a psychopath, is the MMPI going to diagnose you? And the answer is no. It's not going to diagnose you. It's going to give you a psychopathic score, but it's not going to tell them how crazy you are and the fact that you want to bite the heads off of chickens and stab squirrels or something. It's not going to give you that information. Studying predictive validity using actual police performance on the job as the outcome is time-consuming and expensive, so most departments do not do it. It's too expensive. Most of these are being controlled, most of these police departments are being controlled by a city government, and the city government has a budget, and they try to spend as little money as possible, especially on the police department. So they don't pay very well. They tend not to pay very well. Positive relations, unless the chief of police is like the uncle of the mayor or something, then he gets a big paycheck, but nobody else gets a big paycheck. Positive relationships between screening results and performance by police recruits and training have been found. So the more you screen these individuals, the more likely you're going to discover something. Okay. Now we already understand that the more intelligent you are, the higher your IQ, the more frustrated you're going to get with your job. Does that make sense? Okay. You need to be intellectually stimulated. So the smarter you are, the more likely you're going to become frustrated with this job. Researchers have also gathered peer ratings for trainees. Ratings correlate with job retention of police officers, but not with the most other measures of the job performance, or with job performance, or with supervisor ratings. I need a drink. Okay. Validity studies have problems. For example, respondents try to fake good, and of course we all do that. When we take a test, we all try to not tell as much of the truth as possible, but look as good as you possibly can. And sometimes when we take tests, and this is me, I'm sorry, maybe you guys don't do this, but you try to read the test to determine what they're looking for. And then you try to give them what they're looking for, or not give them what they're looking for. You try to give them the very opposite. You don't take it honestly. Do you? I don't think I've ever taken an honest test. I cheat like every chance I get. I try to read what they're looking for and then either give them what they're looking for or not give them what they're looking for. Just to be a jackass.
That's what they do.
Okay. You don't do that when you take tests? So what we can do, and you've seen Police Academy, Steve Gutenberg and, I can't remember the big black guy. He was a football player. I can't remember his name. Anyway. Hightower. He was Hightower. Okay, Steve Gutenberg is the, and he's a screw-up. Steve Gutenberg is a screw-up through the whole thing. And then in the end, of course, in all 8 of the Police Academy movies, Steve Gutenberg comes out as the hero in the end. Because he has leadership ability, right? That's the only thing he has, is his ability to do the right thing at the right moment. That's the only capability he has. Screws up through the whole movie. And then in the end, of course, he brings everybody together, and now they're all recruits, including the black lady with a really high-pitched voice, who, when she tells people to stop, she gets really mean, and the voice gets really deep. Yeah. Okay. So the reality is, if we allowed people to rate the other recruits, they tend to be relatively accurate, because these people have been working with the other recruits all the entire academy. So that's fairly accurate. The supervisors' ratings tend to be fairly accurate. As a result of life-threatening incidents or other indicators that an officer is psychologically impaired, Police administrators can order an officer to undergo an evaluation of fitness to continue performing his or her duty. So if something happens to them, especially a life-threatening event, usually you become a police officer not thinking that people are going to be shooting at you, or not thinking that it's dangerous. But of course, as my cousin could attest if he were still alive, sometimes you get called to a very simple case, and of course, it's life-threatening. It can be fatal, and in his case, of course, it was fatal. So one of the things that you need to do, and this wasn't the first time he had ever responded to a domestic disturbance problem where he was shot at. Actually, it had just happened to him a couple weeks before. And he called me on the phone, and he said, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. And we had a relatively long conversation, and in the end, of course, I'm not saying anything, and he's just going and going and going and going. And in the end, he said, I'm really good at this job. This isn't the first time I've ever almost been killed. And of course, it's 2 weeks later that he actually does get killed. Really kind of interesting. Anyway, so life-threatening things happen to you from time to time. Some policemen, if you talk to them, they'll tell you, I've never had to pull my gun. I've never been in that situation that was that dangerous. Other individuals, seems like every time they come across something, they have to threaten somebody, or they have to shoot somebody. My cousin had just shot somebody 6 weeks before and killed them. And it was a situation where the individual, how can I explain this? The individual threatened the police, and he wanted them to shoot. It was suicide by cop, if you've ever heard that term. But it was a suicide by cop situation. So when something traumatic like this happens, one of the things that you need that police departments will do, they'll put them on paid leave or administrative leave or something. And actually, my cousin was using me as his counselor. He'd gone to the after he talked to me, went to the counselor, he got approved to go back on duty without any problem. But if he hadn't talked to me, potentially what would have happened would have been that they would have put him on leave because he needed to work through his problems. It was a little bit easier with me because police counselors police counselors are really kind of interesting. They hear the same stories over and over and over again. And they become a little bit calloused. So they don't help as much as, all I did was listen to him on the telephone. That's all I did was listen to him on the phone. This is kind of an interesting story. This is a lady that was she had a second job. She was a police officer, but her second job was as a dominatrix. And the question was, does she have the personality to be a good police officer? So what do you think? Can a dominatrix be a good police officer? I'm sorry, do you guys know what a dominatrix is? Okay, dominatrix is a woman who men come to her so that she can be mean to them. And so she dominates them.
Yeah.
So she makes them lick her shoes, and she whips them.
She's perfect.
Perfect woman. So she's the perfect woman. Anyway, so it's one of the sexual fetishes that some select individuals have, and that was her other job, was as a dominatrix. She was
I got no
mean to
problem
people.
with that.
I'd say it's arguable because it's two separate jobs.
Yeah.
And if she can, we all know females have a larger corpus callosum, so I'm pretty sure. I don't know, it depends, and if she lets it blend in with the other or not. And how long she's been doing one or the other.
She was a
Like if that
dominatrix.
one was newer, then yeah, I'd be worried about her.
She was a dominatrix. She graduated from college, and that's when she became a dominatrix. In her 30s, she became a police officer.
Then no.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. If it was something new, if the dominatrix was like a newly developed attribute because of her police job, then that would be something else there.
She was married. to her job. She was married. This was her second job. She never had sex with these guys. It's not like she is a prostitute. She gets paid to be mean to men. She was married to a guy that she didn't dominate.
See?
I know. I know. There's. So what do you think? And she was a decorated police officer. They didn't know what her other job was. She didn't tell them. And that's why she got in trouble. She got in trouble because she didn't inform them that she had a second job.
Yeah, she should have told them.
She got in trouble. Okay. Fascinating case. So how do you think it turned out? Did they leave her on the force?
No,
Did they fire her
I think,
tail for?
yeah.
They didn't. They left her on the force.
Yes.
The question was, she had a skewed idea. Well, the idea was potentially she had a skewed idea of men, because the men that she'd come the most in contact with, like, besides her husband, were men that wanted to be dominated, that wanted her to beat them up, wanted her to spank them, and do horrible things to them. So she had this skewed idea of what men wanted or needed.
In order for them to calm break down and be manageable.
I guess it could be because she, like, for her reasons why she does it's for sexual reasons, but if she's at work,
Right.
unless she's like trying to
Join
sexually
the thing.
perform
Exactly,
each and every one of them,
exactly.
I don't think that's.
She didn't take her whip with her to work.
The handcuffs maybe, but not the whip.
Exactly. Two different models of fitness for duty evaluations. Department used the same psychologist to perform the evaluation and to provide treatment. And of course, she had to go to, after they discovered that she was a dominatrix, she had to go to the counselor. And the first counselor that she went to was male. And he was also one of her clients.
Not surprising.
I know. So then she went to the female counselor, and the female counselor cleared her. The first guy wasn't going to clear her, but the second guy, or the female counselor actually cleared her. And now she's back on the force. This is in New York City, by the way. The psychologist who evaluates does not provide treatment. This avoids an ethical conflict between keeping the therapy confidential and disclosing an officer's psychological functioning to supervisors. Okay, so you need at least two counselors, one to make the decision and the other one to do the counseling. Okay. And they flip-flop between one person and the next. So this one they're going to be the counselor, this one they're going to evaluate. The next one they're going to counsel, then they're going to evaluate. Okay. Police Academy lasts for 14 to 24 weeks. It's a 24-hour a day, 40 hours a week, 40 hours a week. 14 to 24 weeks, which is a long time, right? That's like half a year. Okay. Police Academy. Many departments require some college education. So they do want intelligent people, but they don't want geniuses in their police force. If they have geniuses, they're going to become easily frustrated. They're also going to do too much thinking. They need to react. Sometimes you need to react to a situation rather than think about a situation. It's a dangerous situation, you need to react to it. You need to
So you don't need to be smart to go to the police academy?
No. But you need some college.
Are those the
Wait a minute, what am I saying? You need to have some degree of intelligence, but if you are too smart, then they don't want you. Okay. Does that make sense? You need average intelligence. You need maybe above average intelligence. They don't want geniuses in their police department.
Is that the requirements here for the tribal police, or is that just
I
state?
don't know what the requirements are. I have no idea. There are two types of criticism of police training programs that are common. One is after rigorous selection procedures, few trainees fail the training. Perhaps graduation is too easy, and one study found that almost 25% of the officers leave their jobs within the first 16 months of work. That's kind of interesting. That's a lot of people. That's training a lot of people, and it's expensive to train people. But 25% leave within the first 16 months of work. And that's a good thing. People think they want to be police officers, and then they find out they don't have the personality for it, they don't have the temperament for it, they get angry too easily, and these people really need to leave. I had a sister-in-law, wanted to be a teacher all of her life. So finally, she leaves her husband and goes to college to get her master's degree in education so that she can teach, because she's always wanted to be an English teacher. So she's going through training to be a teacher, and she's almost done, and the evaluators are telling her, you know, you're not very good at this. I don't know if we should pass you or not. Of course, it's an academic program, so they want the bucks, right? So they're going to keep you in the program, trying to train you to do something else, trying to get you so that you can do it, so that you keep paying them money. Okay. So right at the end, she realizes, well, why do I want to be a teacher? I don't like kids. I don't like people. I don't want to be around people. So what is it that made me want to be a teacher? And I was real impressed with her, because she was an arrogant person, very arrogant person. But she realized that the reason she wanted to be a teacher was because she wanted to impress people. And it didn't matter whether they were third graders or fifth graders or college students. She just wanted them to think that she was smart. She wanted to impress them with her intellect. And that's why she wanted to be a teacher. She didn't want to help people. She didn't care if they got educated. She didn't even really like them. She would have flunked them all. And she realized that. So she stopped being a teacher. And she went back to doing what she was doing before. Same thing happens with policemen. I know people that have wanted to be policemen all their lives. They've aimed to do this. They learned how to shoot. They learned how to take people down with a baton. They learned this. They learned that. They were always focused on becoming a police officer. They went to college and took criminal justice. They got their AA degree in criminal justice. They went to police academy and they scored all the top scores. They worked for a month and they quit. They had the wrong reason for wanting to be a police officer. Remember, police officer they serve the community, and that's what you have to focus on. If you want to bully people, then you're in the wrong job. It's just not the way it works. And that's why a lot of these individuals go all the way through academy and then they just drop out. They leave. They can't handle it. Because they realize they're there for the wrong reason. Okay. As psychologists, that's what we need to figure out. We need to figure out if they're there for the wrong reason. Now, some people can be there for the wrong reason and they still become good police officers. It's possible, but something has to change. They have to realize that, oh my God, I'm not arresting people. I'm not spending 8 hours arresting drug dealers. I'm spending 1 day a month arresting people, and I'm spending the rest of my time helping people. And of course, if they can make that transition, then they can remain on the force. There is insufficient training in the field, as well as a lack of close supervision of trainees during the time that they spend on patrol. And of course, I was just reading about this. I looked up the statistics on domestic violence, and really they don't have any statistics. And then I thought of my cousin Rod. I really don't think of cousin Rod very often. You can imagine, it's kind of painful to think of somebody he was a good police officer. And he was there for the right reason. And he responded correctly. She screamed, he needed to respond. And he did, he responded correctly. Unfortunately, of course, the guy had a shotgun behind the door. I forgot what my point was, sorry. I get lost sometimes. I can't help myself. Okay. Training in crisis and intervention. Your text presents 3 types of crisis situations to which police are often called. Incidents involving mentally ill citizens, family disturbances, of course, and the taking of hostages. If we look at the three of these, how many of these have to do with crimes? Maybe, probably not, definitely. If they're taking hostages, of course it's a crime. So most of the time you're going to be responding to things that are questionable as far as whether they're criminal or not. Okay, so it's your job to decide whether there is a case against this select individual. And of course, when we're dealing with the mentally ill, let me tell you a quick story. I know I keep telling you stories, but let me tell you a quick story about what happened, why there are so many mentally ill people out on the streets. Once upon a time in America, we had mental hospitals in every state. Sometimes we had several mental hospitals in every state. And they were taking individuals that really couldn't function in society. And then we went into an economic downturn. And during that economic downturn, there was a group of people in the United States that decided that we needed to stop spending so much money on crazy people. Okay. And then he was elected President of the United States. This was in 1980. Ronald Reagan ran against Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter's economy was collapsing. Reagan took over and he was trying to cut wherever he possibly could. And one of the things that he cut was the funding for state hospitals. He cut all the funding. One of the other things he cut was they were building housing on Indian reservations, and he cut that housing as well. He didn't cut the building of the housing. He cut the plumbing that went into the housing, because that's the only money that he could control. So we built all these houses on all these reservations and didn't put any plumbing in. Okay, so that was Ronald Reagan. Who came next? Bush 1 came next. So guess who put the plumbing in to your housing? Bill Clinton. No, it was Bill. Yeah, good old Bill. What a silly guy he was. He put plumbing in your house. Nice guy.
Should put a pool in there.
Yeah, you should put a pool in. Jacuzzi. That's one of the reasons if you go to select reservations, all their plumbing is on the outside. It's not on the outside, but it's outside the walls. So, I know that's stupid, but yeah, their plumbing's on the outside. So if you go to, Fort Belknap, some of the houses have.
So they had to do an addition?
They put the plumbing in, the walls were already built, so they would have had to pour the walls out and put in the plumbing. So what they did, they put the plumbing in on the outside of the wall. So all the pipes, they're all on the outside. But at least there's plumbing, which is better than what they had before. No plumbing. Outhouses. Incidents involving mentally ill citizens, of course. How do you know if they're mentally ill? You don't. How do you know if they're mentally ill or if they're drunk? You don't. You've got to arrest them or not arrest them, but you have to talk to the individuals. Try to figure out if they're high on PCP, if they're stoned, or if they're on crystal meth, or if they have a mental illness. What do you do with somebody that's schizophrenic? Is that against the law? Being schizophrenic? You're going to arrest this guy? Anyway, okay, so I didn't finish my story about Ronald Reagan. Anyway, so he closes all the hospitals. So what did they do with all the people that were in? Yeah, they just threw them out on the streets, which is kind of sad. They tried to medicate them, but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. They were in the hospitals because the medicines didn't work. So it's really kind of a tragedy. That's why we have so many mentally ill out on the streets. Some of these people should be institutionalized, but there's no institution to put them in because the states don't maintain mental hospitals anymore. I was in Oklahoma in the early 90s, and of course they were closing the hospitals all throughout the Reagan administration and throughout the Bush administration. So here I was in Oklahoma. They have the largest mental hospital in the United States was on just off the University of Oklahoma campus. It was almost as big as the campus. I mean, it was that big. And they completely closed the place down. The only place that was open was the pharmacy. So all the people from Oklahoma City, the University of Oklahoma is in Norman, which is right next to Oklahoma City. So all the people from Oklahoma City who had a mental illness would have to walk or find transportation to go out to Norman in order to get their medication, as strange as that sounds. So you'd see this line of people walking to Norman, just bizarre, and it's like, I don't know, 15, 20 miles or something. Anyway, strange. Family disturbances, of course, are another problem. Is it his fault? Is it her fault? And we're going to find out whose fault it is in a second. The taking of hostages, of course, is another problem. Interactions with mentally ill citizens. One consequence of deinstitutionalization is that supervising people with mental illness is common for police. I took this right out of the text. They didn't really explain what deinstitutionalization is, but I just told you what it was. Ronald Reagan closed all the institutions, and it was a tragedy of sorts. They said these people could live out on the economy. We shouldn't have any problem with them, but we have. We've had tons and tons of problems with these individuals. We've had to increase the police forces in order to control the people with mental illnesses. Police are reluctant to arrest the mentally ill or to require their emergency hospitalization unless their behavior presents an obvious danger to themselves or to others. Something happened yesterday in Albuquerque. Oh, some guy, displayed himself to a whole church full of people, like 200 people in the church, I know. Is that okay? What do we do with this? Indecent exposure. What if it turns out that this guy has a mental illness? Do we still throw him in jail for, I don't know, do we? You don't want that happening again. There were kids in that room, and they saw this man's penis. We're all shocked. I know, should he be arrested? I don't know. If he had displayed himself to 2 or 3 people, do we arrest this guy? If he's got a mental illness? This is the question that we come up with all the time. The people, when you drive around Albuquerque, it's really kind of interesting. If you drive around Albuquerque, you got all the people with the signs saying, help me, I'm a veteran. I have 4 Bronze Stars or something. Do you give them money? Do you arrest them for panhandling? You know, it's against the law in New Mexico to panhandle. I don't know, but okay. They have mental illness. Do we arrest them, is the question. They're homeless. Teplin in 1984 found that the presence of mental illness increases rather than decreases the probability of arrest, which is very logical. They're acting erratically, you're trying to protect the community, therefore you arrest them. You have a choice, you can take them to jail, or you can take them to the hospital. And what happens next if you take them to the hospital? They get a psych eval. How long can you hold somebody for a psychological evaluation? Brandon, how long can you hold somebody? What, 48 hours? Is it 48 hours?
About 48.
Yeah, about 48 hours. Brandon knows.
That's close.
It's different in every state. It's actually different in every hospital. So you can hold them for 48 hours and you have to let them go. So we've got the naked guy who we can take to the hospital because he's got a mental illness, but we can only hold him for 48 hours. Because you guys don't want to put him in a hospital for an extended length of time. And of course you don't want to arrest him. Well, maybe you do want to arrest him. I don't know. What do you do with the mentally ill? The rate of severe mental disorders in jail populations, often combined with diagnoses of substance abuse and personality disorder in the same individual, is alarmingly high, of course. One estimate of the prevalence of individuals with severe mental illness in jails is 14.5% for male inmates and 31% for female inmates. Really? 31%? So are women crazier than men are? Is that what I'm seeing here? Is that how I
Look at
should...
me, Brian.
Is that how I should interpret that?
I was looking
this way, but from the side view, it's not Brian shooting.
How many, who's more likely to be arrested, a male or a female?
Male.
It's like 85% of all the people being arrested are male. Okay. So why would we incarcerate a female? Why would there be so many females with mental illness? Because we have so many men that are criminals, yeah. So you're going to have fewer of them that have a mental illness, because we have so many males that are criminals. Okay. That's why the statistics are skewed. Does that make sense? Okay. We're playing statistics now. Okay. Police differ in their level of mental health training that they receive. Jurisdictions with specialized mental health training were especially effective in crisis intervention. Police made fewer arrests because of the fact that the police department was trained to deal with these individuals on the street, so they didn't have to arrest them. If you know how to talk to individuals that are suffering from a mental illness, it's possible that you can talk this person out of acting erratically. But you have to know how to talk to them. So if you're a policeman who hasn't had any training in mental health training, then it's possible that if you try to talk to somebody, you're going to talk to them incorrectly. You can't boss them around. You can't order them to do anything. Otherwise, they will react. They will rebel against you, and then they will react in a negative manner. But if you can talk to them without bossing them around, without antagonizing them, then possibly you can talk them down from their erratic behavior. It's possible if somebody has used crystal meth, and these people their brains are firing more than they should be firing. It's possible that you can talk this person down. It's possible. But you have to understand what the situation is. You have to read them correctly. Many police departments around the country now have a crisis intervention team based on the Memphis model. Why Memphis? Does anybody know what was going on in Memphis? Why they have the model? Why they came up with the model?
We have a lot of riots.
They do. They also have a lot of mental illness, because that's where the state hospital was, in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis, Tennessee is on the Mississippi border. They got a lot of mental patients from Mississippi that came up there. Okay. The other interesting thing about that mental hospital was that it was for black people. This is back when they segregated these things. They were for black people. So Mississippi would take their African Americans who were suffering from mental illness, and if they didn't go to Jackson, where their black hospital was, they'd go to Memphis. So they would take all the people, or some of the people that were African American, they'd send them to Memphis. They'd send them across the bridge, which is funny. Well, it's not that funny, because they would make them walk across the bridge. They wouldn't take them across the bridge, they'd make them walk across the bridge. And once they walked across the bridge, then they were in Tennessee, and if they got arrested, of course, they went to the mental hospital in Memphis. Anyway, that's why Memphis came up with the model. It provides law enforcement officers the tools and the skills necessary in dealing with mentally ill persons. And it's because Memphis had so many mentally ill people. And it's because it was where the black hospital was in Tennessee. The white hospital was in Knoxville. But the black hospital was in Memphis. So it has a large black population. A lot of the population, since they closed the damn hospital, a lot of the population lives in Memphis, in the ghettos of Memphis. So Memphis, Tennessee is really kind of an interesting place. If you go there, of course I haven't been there since, when was I there? In the 90s, in the middle 90s. But it was pretty bad in the 90s. I mean, you'd see people walking down the street, talking to themselves, screaming at themselves. Disorganized schizophrenia. Anyway. What are we doing? Okay. The CIT may be an effective way to link individuals with mental illnesses with indicated mental health treatment. CIT trained officers report feeling better prepared for their encounters with individuals with mental illnesses. I was just dealing with an individual that is looking for a job. Actually, she's looking for a job. And she was a police officer for 7 years, and then she became a social worker. She was on one of these CIT teams. Really kind of fascinating. And that's why she became a social worker. She moved away from police work. And because she moved away from police work, then she became a social worker, decided that's the career she wanted. She went to school to be a social worker, and then she became a licensed clinical social worker. CIT may have a lower arrest rate and lower associated criminal justice costs than other diversionary approaches. So this really works because it lowers the cost of going to court. And the reason it lowers cost is because they can take care of a mental health situation rather than arrest them and send them to the courts. They can take care of this on the streets. So there are fewer arrests. So it really pays you to have one of these teams. The problem is the burnout rate is fairly high. It tends to be really high. You have to be dedicated to the people that you're serving. Can you imagine being a police officer? What are the kind of people that you come in contact with? This is something that we need to understand. So when I get stopped by a policeman, how often is he stopping a white PhD person with who drives a little red sports car? How often is he stopping that guy?
Not very often.
No, of course not. There's hardly any of us around. So what kind of people are police officers coming in contact with? And this is one of the problems with being a police officer. This is one of the reasons why if you talk to these individuals, they tend to have a relatively low opinion of people, of everybody, because...
Of their own people.
Right, yeah, exactly. That's a good point. So who are they coming in contact with?
Drug addicts.
I'm sorry?
Drug addicts.
Drug addicts, the
Drug
mentally
drivers.
ill, criminals,
Victims and perpetrators.
victims and perpetrators. That's a good point. So who's more fun, the victims or the perpetrators?
Probably
Neither.
that's what I was gonna say, probably neither one of them.
Neither one. So who are the only normal people these people have come in contact with? Me, yeah, I'm the only one. I'm the only normal people. And I never get stopped by the police, so they never come in contact with me. Well, not anymore, I don't drive that fast anymore. And you guys told me I could go 80 miles an hour on the rest. Isn't that what you guys said? Okay.
I said 75, Ryan.
Yeah, I said 75.
I'll use it. So when I go 80, it's not your fault that I got stopped.
See, my class said 75.
Okay, class at 75. I go 65. So, and I get passed like by your great uncle passes me, you know. 97 years old, and go, what's wrong with this little white guy in this little red car? My God, he's only going 65. I'm going to pass him on a curve, he's so stupid. I'll show him. I don't know, do you have an uncle that's 95 years old? No. Somebody else's uncle. Yeah, they come in contact with the dregs of society, don't they? They come in contact with criminals. They come in contact with drug addicts. They come in contact with pushers. They come in contact with prostitutes. So what do they think of women? The only women they come in contact with are women who have been domestically abused and women who are prostitutes or are pushers, or they don't come in contact with. It's not like going to church. I guess, I don't know, I've never been to church, so I don't understand these. Anyway, yeah, so their concept of society is a little bit skewed. Remember I told you about my friend who carries a Glock 45 on his hip and a Mossberg under his seat. He's a policeman. And his world has been that ugly. It really has been. I come in contact with you guys, the best and the brightest, right? So my idea of the world is completely different from his. So you have to understand these guys, their concept of the world is a lot different than mine would be. Okay. So burnout is relatively high. Divorce is extremely high in the police departments, unfortunately. Okay. Sorry, I won't preach anymore. For example, the incidence of mental health problems in individuals incarcerated in the United States has been cited to be 56% in state prisons, prisoners among state prisoners, 45% in federal inmates, and 64% of those in jail. 64%. Okay, those are local jails, of course. So they're incarcerating individuals that have mental illness. What do you do with them? You want to take them off the street. You want to change something. You want them to come down off of things. One of the things about people with mental illness, they're trying to make themselves feel normal. Well, how do you do that? Well, you can take your medication, that works, but you can also smoke cigarettes. That increases your dopamine level. You can smoke pot. That helps. It mellows you out. You can take illegal drugs, and sometimes that works. Makes you feel more normal. So these people, or alcohol, that increases your GABA level. It's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Makes you feel more normal. And that's really one of the reasons why we have to arrest all these people. Okay, we'll stop right here. We'll pick this up next week, as much fun as that is.
So we're arresting people for being normal now?
No, we're arresting them for being abnormal. But of course, they're drunk, so that's the only normal that they feel. That's more normal than what if they weren't drinking.
So, what is your opinion on the flyers that the security have up with the individual that comes on campus? The big old flyers they have about Hanson being a danger, and to report him if he's on campus. You know the gentleman that I said that was the schizophrenic?
Right, he tried to borrow money from me, between here and the post office, one day. Decided he was my new best friend, or I was his new best friend. Is he a danger?
I think he is, because
At
when
times.
he's walking, he's got this expression, this cheesy face, like he's gonna do something. And I was thinking about this at the beginning of class